The following interview was performed at the Bell Arts Factory, 432 North Ventura Avenue, Ventura, California, 93001, July 10th, 2010. And the person being interviewed is Barbara Enriquez Duran. And the interviewers that day were Moses Mora and Suzanne Lawrence, and M.B. Hanrahan was shooting the video. This is Moses Mora on Saturday, July 10th, 2010, at the Bell Arts Factory. For the Tortilla Flats Archive, our archival team this morning, M.B. Hanrahan along with myself, Suzanne Lawrence, and Punky Palenzuelos. Today, we have the honor of interviewing Barbara Duran. I want to say what an honor it really is. Your family made the mural definitely one of the highlights of the mural, for sure, and the stories that endured. Moses. First question is, who were your parents and where they came from, in terms of if they came out of this area, and where were they living when you were born and your siblings? Barbara. My dad was Benny Enriquez, and he was born in Mexico, actually. My mother, Esther Enriquez, she was born in Clifton, Arizona. They met up in Oxnard, where I was born. My dad was always a grocer. He worked for a grocery store in Oxnard, and then eventually, after I was born, we moved to Ventura. That's where I grew up, in Ventura. Tell us about your siblings. That was from Moses. Barbara. I was only about a year when we moved to Ventura, and we lived on Park Row, where my sister was born. I have 4 sisters, Rosie, who is now deceased, Esther, who lives in Yuma, Arizona, and my 2 younger sisters, Angie and Pat. Pat lives on Simpson Street. Angie is married to Bob Marquez, who is another Tortilla Flats family, the Marquez, and they live in East Ventura. So we were 5 girls, and I'm the oldest. Moses. 5 girls. Okay, so you lived on Park Row, and did you basically spend most of your life there, or did you move? Barbara. No, we moved after my sister Rosie was born. We moved to Simpson Street, and that's where we grew up, on Simpson Street. My sister Pat lives on the side where we all grew up. Moses. Take us to kindergarten and your primary education. Barbara. I went to grammar school at Sheridan Way. Moses. Was there a kindergarten attached to that? Barbara. I never went to kindergarten. Moses. Okay, so you went to Sheridan Way. Barbara. I went to Sheridan Way and then went to Ventura Junior High, and from there to the high school. Moses. And your sisters, your younger sister Patsy and I, were at Holy Cross together. Eventually, did some of them end up going to Catholic school? Barbara. Yes, my sister Rosie and I went to public school. We went to Sheridan Way, and my 3 younger sisters did go to Holy Cross. Moses. Getting back to Park Row and Simpson, growing up, being at that young age, do you remember some of your neighbors or playmates at that time? Barbara. Not from Park Row. I was still a baby when we moved to Simpson Street. The Lopezes lived next to us, and the Valdez lived up the street from us. My classmate, Barbara Mitchell, who I still see once in a while, I don't know if you remember Barbara. Suzanne. No, I was Rosie's age. How much younger was Rosie? Barbara. 2 years. 2 years younger. Yeah. Moses. Did we get what year you were born? Barbara. 1935. Moses. 1935. Barbara. 1935 in Oxnard. My sister Rosie was born in 1937 on Park Row. Moses. So you were just a little toddler, though, when you did come to Ventura. Barbara. Yes, I was just a baby. Moses. You essentially grew up in Ventura. Barbara. Yes. Suzanne. Was your father working for someone else at the time, or had he started the market? Barbara. My dad worked in Oxnard. He worked at a store. I don't know which one. It might have been Safeway. When we moved to Ventura, he had a store which was on the corner of Simpson Street. What was the name of that store where your brother worked? Addressing someone in the audience, question to husband Pete Duran. Remember when my dad had the store on Simpson and your brother worked for him for a while? Pete. I don't know which store he worked at. Moses. Which part of Simpson, by Olive or more by the Avenue? Barbara. On the Avenue. There was a store there that was right on the corner of Simpson and the Avenue that my dad worked at for a while. Moses. Would that have been like the old senior center building? Barbara. Yes, it was that building. Then he worked for the A&P on Thompson, the old A&P on Mita Street. Eventually, he bought his own business. Suzanne. Did your mom stay at home with you girls? That's a handful. 5 girls. Barbara. Not really. She helped. Suzanne. Did she? In the store? Barbara. Well, not when he was employed by someone else. Once he bought his own business, we all worked there. Suzanne. Yeah, as I recall. Suzanne. When did he open his own business? What year was that? Barbara. I don't remember. Suzanne. Like you were in grammar school at that time or junior high? Barbara. It was in the 40s, don't you think? Addressing the question to her husband, Pete. Pete. I wasn't around then. Barbara. I think it was around the 40s when he opened his first store. Suzanne. I was trying to think of how early did you start working? Barbara. I must have been in junior high school. My sister and I both. Suzanne. Okay. Moses. You know, when I asked you the question, who were your neighbors and who were your playmates, then I thought, she had 5 sisters. There's the playmates right there. That was a self-contained unit in a sense. Barbara. Right. Moses. So, do you think by the time of World War II your father had his business up? Barbara. I think so. Moses. Was that the first store over on Ventura Avenue by Seaside Park? Barbara. Yes, that was his first store. Moses. Getting back to your education real quick, did you go to school at Sheridan Way School for 6 years? Barbara. 6 years. Moses. Where did you attend 7th grade and 8th grade? Barbara. Ventura Junior High School. Moses. Is that where Cabrillo is located today? Barbara. Yes. Suzanne. That was a good walk. You walked every morning? Barbara. I thought we had a bus. Suzanne. Did you have a school bus out there? Barbara. I think so. Moses. So De Anza wasn't in existence yet? Barbara. No. Moses. So the entire West Side Avenue kids essentially had to go to that location at Cabrillo, what we know today as Cabrillo Junior High School. Barbara. Yes, that was the only junior high school in town. Suzanne. Yeah, all the East End kids did too. Of course, the East End only went to 5 Points, but still, we all went there. Barbara. Yes, it was the only junior high in town. Wasn't it 7th, 8th, and 9th grade? Suzanne. Yes, that sounds right. But we didn't go to high school until 10th grade, so it was 7th, 8th, and 9th. Barbara. And that was Ventura Senior High. It was called Ventura Senior High. Moses. Located where? Barbara. Where it is now. Moses. What we know today as Ventura High School. Barbara. But it was an ivy-covered building. Suzanne. Yeah, and it was a college. Barbara. Then the junior college, or JC, was in the back of Poli Street. I went to Quonset hut classes there. They had the classes in Quonset huts. Moses. Going back to the early part of your life, your household, was it primarily English-speaking, Spanish-speaking? Barbara. Both basically English. Moses. Your parents had mastered English. Barbara. Oh, yes, but we had relatives. Our grandparents spoke Spanish, and we picked up Spanish that way. Suzanne. Did your grandparents live close? Barbara. No, they lived in Oxnard, but we saw them. Suzanne. Yeah. Moses, I was going to ask you about your parents, brothers, and sisters. Did you have aunts and uncles then? Cousins? Barbara, my father had only one sister. We had cousins, but they lived in Orange County, so we didn't see them at all. My mother had two sisters. One lived in Los Angeles, and we would see her once in a while, and my cousins. Moses, did you give us your mother's maiden name? Barbara, Acosta. Moses, Acosta. I remember when we started the process of doing interviews, MB and I had, well, it was more than 15 years ago, when we would ask people, where did you shop? And they would say, Benny's Market. I remember the second Benny's Market, but the original Benny's Market was something for us to verify and verify. Then one day we were doing an interview and someone came and showed us this picture. It must have been no more than 1.5 inches by 1.5 inches, and it was a picture of their little dog taken at Seaside Park. Way in the background, we saw Benny's Market. At least that told us the shape of the building, because then we could just write Benny's and Coca-Cola or whatever, but we had the shape of the building. It really was a godsend when we would be out there on Figueroa Street painting day after day, and you would go walking by, and I remember the day you walked up and said, where are you going to put Benny's Market on this mural? And you asked us, were we? And I said, oh, absolutely. Then you said, well, I'm Benny's daughter. That was so great for us because of all the photographs of your parents, your sisters, inside and outside of the store. That was one of the biggest highlights and the big pluses that we got. Suzanne, weren't you the one that corrected the spelling of Benny's? Barbara, yes, I did. It was spelled with a Y, and he would always spell his name with an I-E. Moses, so you helped out at the store, and primarily that was it. You know how we interview people, and they said, we worked at Woolworths, we worked in the fields. Your work was essentially at the store. Barbara, yes, at the store. My sister and I both worked at the store. We would go to school. We were going to Ventura Junior High at the time. We would walk after school to the store and work at the store until dinner time. My mother would cook dinner right there at the store, and we spent most of our waking hours down in that area, in the Tortilla Flats area. We would only come home to Simpson Street in the evening just to do our homework and to go to bed. Then the next day to school, and then to work at the store. So that's my connection with Tortilla Flats. We got to know all the people down there. It was a very colorful neighborhood. Your father, I would take it, oh, this is Moses speaking, was past the age of having to be in World War II. Barbara, right. Moses, nobody in your family, because you didn't have brothers, was necessarily affected with World War II like that. Barbara, that's right. Moses, can you tell us some childhood stories or any relationship going to the fairgrounds or to the fair or when the circus came to town? Any of those types of things that you remember doing, was that a part of your life in any way? Suzanne, you were working at the store. Barbara, yeah, I was working at the store, and we really didn't do much recreational. Moses, in terms of the county fair, you didn't get off to go to the fair? Barbara, I really don't remember. Suzanne, was the fair a busy time at the store? Lots of time that happens. Barbara, I don't remember. Suzanne, did the 3 younger girls get more of a chance to be social and to play and join clubs and so forth? Barbara, yeah, they were much younger, so they really didn't work much at the store. Suzanne, but you and Rosie continued to. Barbara, yes, we did. Suzanne, and what's the age separation between Rosie and the next sister? Barbara, only 2 years. My sister Esther did work at the store some, but the 2 younger ones, there's 5 years between the third and the fourth, so they were too little and didn't work too much at the store. Suzanne, did your dad tell you exactly what to do in the course of the day, or did you two operate pretty much out of your own initiative? Barbara, we basically waited on customers. When things were a bit slow, he would have us dust the shelves and line up cans on the shelves, sweep, clean up. He kept us busy. Suzanne. This was probably less self-service than the big A&P, wasn't it? Or did you just ring up people what they brought up? Barbara. Yes, we would just ring up. They would bring up their items to the counter. We had that old-time adding machine with the crank on the side, and we would punch it in and then write their ticket. A lot of people had credit then, so we would write out their ticket and bag up the order, and that was it. Suzanne. Did you bill them on the first of the month when they were running a tab? Barbara. No, we didn't really bill them. We just trusted people to come in and pay on their bill. Suzanne. And they did. Barbara. And they did, most of them, on their payday. Suzanne. Well, you knew everyone. You weren't likely to run off. Barbara. That's right. Moses. This handsome young man sitting next to you, when did you meet him? How did he come into the picture? Barbara. Well, that's kind of a long story. My sister Rosie was involved with his cousin, Alex Polito. So Alex would come down to the house to visit my sister Rosie. Then Peter got out of the Navy in 1954, so he started tagging along with Alex, and that's how we got acquainted. Moses. In 1954? Were you still in high school? Barbara. I graduated from Ventura High School in 1952 and from junior college in 1954, so I was already working at the courthouse by then. Moses. Yeah, that was going to be one of my questions. When did you cut ties with the store? Barbara. About the time we got married in 1957. My dad still had the store, didn't he, when we got married? Pete. I don't know. When we met, you worked at the courthouse. Barbara. Yeah, when we met, I was working at the courthouse, but when did my dad close up the store? Do you remember that year? We were already married, weren't we? Pete. Oh, yeah, when he closed it up? Barbara. Yes. Pete. Yes. Moses. I think somewhere in our archives I heard something about the year 1957. Barbara. Yeah, it was about 1957. That's the year we got married. He was still operating the store, but it must have been shortly after that, wasn't it? Pete. He operated it about 4 years after. Barbara. 4 years after what? Pete. 4 years after we got married. Moses. So we are talking now about the second location of the store. Right. That was from Barbara. Moses. The first location was on Ventura Avenue, across the street from Seaside Park. The second location was near the corner of Ventura Avenue and Mita Street. Barbara. Right. Suzanne. Did he ever have a location out on Thompson by Seaward? Barbara. Well, that was the A&P. Suzanne. Oh, that was where the A&P was then? Okay. Barbara. But he didn't own that. Suzanne. But that was a long time ago. Barbara. Yeah. Moses. So whatever year it was, let's just say for purposes of talking here and now, somewhere in 1957, was this a thing of retirement at the time? A time for him to retire? Barbara. My dad? Moses. Yeah, your father. Barbara. More or less, yes. Pete. He closed the store because he had no more business. Then he went to work at the packing houses in Oxnard for many years. Barbara. That's right. Then he worked at this little store down here on Olive Street, right? Pete. Yeah. Moses. The one on Olive and Harrison? Barbara. Yeah, he worked there for a while too. Pete. And he worked at Avenue Liquor for a while. Suzanne. But there wasn't any business? Was this when they began tearing things out? Pete. Yes, because of the freeway, everyone left, and he didn't have any more business. Suzanne. Yeah. Moses. So he was a victim of the freeway too, the businesses. Pete. Another thing that Barbara didn't mention when they left owing him all that money, and they didn't come back to pay him. Suzanne. Oh, all the people that had tabs with you when they moved out. Barbara. Well, some of the people. We did lose a lot of money. Pete. They owed him a lot of money and they didn't come back. Moses. There seemed to have been a lot. I don't know if it was the same era. but a lot of small stores. I seem to remember 3 stores alone on Ramona Street between Olive and Sheridan Way. There were like 3 little markets, and one is still there. And then we already talked about this little store on Olive, and then you talked about the old adult senior center. Barbara, yeah, there was a store there. Moses. And then where the Central Market was, Hap and Jerry, sometimes called Santa Cruz Market. Barbara, Santa Cruz Market was right there, right? Moses, so there was a lot of competition then. Then there was a market over on Santa Clara and Oak. Today it's My Florist. It used to be the Goodwill store there. Suzanne, oh, that was a big Safeway, wasn't it? Yeah, there was a Safeway. Then there was a P&H market on Santa Clara. Moses, yeah, and that's not even mentioning the Jews market, the national market. So there was a lot of competition, actually. Pete, and then you had the Bayless market on Thompson, too. Suzanne, yeah, they weren't huge stores. We're used to stores that cover city blocks. Moses, yeah, none of them were huge like that. Suzanne, did you have a specialty? Was there anything that they could only get at Benny's? Barbara, not really. Suzanne, is it Felix Market? Somewhere down by the... Moses, Felix Market. Filez. Barbara, Don Filez. Suzanne, yes, someone had said he had tamales. He kept tamales in a bucket out in front or something. Did you have anything special that you did? Barbara, no. Pete, there was Romero's Market, too. Barbara, oh yeah. Romero, right there on Thompson and Figueroa, close by. Suzanne, and Farrad's. Moses, Farrad's, yeah, boy, you had choices. Suzanne, yeah, neighborhood markets. Vaughn's, you can't consider a neighborhood market. You just get in your car and go to Vaughn's. Moses, when you mentioned working at the courthouse, how did that come about? What kind of work was that? Barbara, it was clerical work. Actually, a neighbor of my dad's store, the one on Meta Street, there was a husband and wife, and their name was Fulkerson, and she worked at the courthouse. She asked me one time if I would be interested in working summers between high school and JC, junior college. I was going to JC at the time, so I went up and worked what they called extra help, typing delinquent rolls in the tax collector's office. Those that didn't pay their taxes, their property went delinquent. In those days, we didn't even have electrical typewriters. It was a regular typewriter where you had the thing with the cartridge. Moses, and carbon paper to make a copy. Barbara, and carbon paper. I had to type up the delinquent rolls for the county. It was a huge roller type typewriter where you stuck in all these extra large pieces of paper with all your carbons in between the roller. That's what would go to the state as delinquent property. That's where I started in the tax collector's office, but eventually wound up at the County of Superintendents of Schools office after I graduated. Then I took the civil service test and went to work for the County of Superintendents of Schools. I worked there for 38 years. Moses, after you graduated from high school? Barbara, no, JC, junior college. Oh, okay. That was from Moses. Suzanne, had you done the books with your dad, or did he take care of that at the store? Barbara, no, I really didn't take care of the books. I was too young then. Moses, but that provided you with some know-how in what you were going to go do in life. Barbara, yeah. Moses, so you went to Ventura Junior College. Barbara, yes. That's when they were on Poli Street. It was before the new campus, the campus that we know now. Moses, and did you say you ended up working 38 years for the county? Barbara, yes, I retired. Moses, the bulk of those years doing what? Secretarial work. Moses, Pete, what kind of work did you get into? Pete, I worked for Las Palmas. Moses, oh, Las Palmas right here on the Ventura Avenue? Did you make a career out of that? Pete, pardon me? Did you make a career out of that? Pete, yeah, I worked about 28 years, almost 29 years there. Moses, okay, well, good. Suzanne, where were they located when you started? Pete, right there. Suzanne, right, the same place. Pete, the same place. They started right on top of Poli and then came down and then they stayed there. Suzanne, for the record, exactly where is that? Lots of time people referred to, well, it's where the old post office was, which was fine if you knew where the old post office was. Moses, that would be the stretch between Main and Fix Way, where the processor was, a little bit south of Processors. Susan, Processors Bakery? Moses, Processors Bakery. That whole big complex was huge, wasn't it? Pete, it was 135 Garden Street. Suzanne, there you go. Moses, Garden Street? Pete, yes. Moses, okay. Barbara, there was the mailing address, but actually the entrance was on the avenue. Pete, that was the front of it, and the avenue was the back. Suzanne, what did you do there? Pete, I was the traffic manager. Suzanne, how far were they shipping things? Pete, we shipped all the way to Texas and Washington. Suzanne, how many products at the time? Pete, well, we had, I don't know, about 10, I think, products at the time. Suzanne, and how many people worked there? Pete, when I left, there were about 50 altogether. Moses, wow, that's considerable. Pete, Barney used to work there too. Suzanne, well, does this all go way back to the original chili factory? Barbara, yeah. Suzanne, which was, I remember stories, the kids would work at the chili factory. Everyone had worked at the chili factory at one time or another. Barbara, yeah. Moses, so was that Ventura owned? Pete, yes, Farad owned it. Moses, oh, Farad. Pete, Raymer's had the recipe there hanging, but they were partners, and that's why it's called Raymer's and Farad. Mr. Ramirez had the recipe, and Farad had the money. Suzanne, that was a good combination. Pete, it was a good combination. That's why they call it Raymer's and Farad. Suzanne, the palms that are on the label, were those the mission palms? Pete, no. They were out in the back there at Jew's Market on Main Street. Suzanne, oh, really? Barbara, on Colombo. Pete, Colombo, yeah. Suzanne, oh, yeah. Those were the mission palms that they built that funny little adobe building? Barbara, right, right. Suzanne, yes, with the jawbone from the Big Bone Saloon. Barbara, isn't that where they got their name? Las Palmas? Pete, I think so. Because when they built that big warehouse there, they planted 2 big palm trees, and they made the little house like that. Suzanne, yeah, they made it their own little monument. Barbara, that was the label of Las Palmas Chili. Suzanne, that's a long time that company's been in business, a long time. Barbara, yeah. Moses, actually the first mural that I got involved in was in my own garage, and I modeled it after the label. Barbara, really? Moses, of Las Palmas. Suzanne, part of our culture. Moses, yeah. Barbara, well, they eventually moved out to Anthony, Texas, right? Who was it? La Victoria that took it over? Pete, old El Paso for about a month. Then Pet Food bought them out. So now Pillsbury owns them. Moses, gee, that's quite an image. Sometimes it's scary to know something like Purina owns Jack in the Box or something like that. You begin to wonder. Suzanne, but it all began on Poli Street. Pete, yes, they had a tin building on top. Suzanne, and the Ramirez family started it with their recipe? Pete, well, I think the Ramirez and Farad, because they had that recipe. Suzanne, it worked. Moses, yeah, I think that's something for Ventura to be proud of. I'm sitting here thinking, getting back to your education, addressing Barbara, you might be one of the few so far that didn't go to either Holy Cross or May Henning. Barbara, that's right. We lived down here on the avenue. Like I say, we didn't really live in Tortilla Flats. Suzanne, you just spent your days there. Barbara, yes, we spent most of our waking hours there and got to know the people, but actually we lived on Simpson, and went to Sheridan Way rather than Holy Cross or May Henning. Moses. If you can remember being born in Oxnard, to moving to Park Row and then to Simpson, did you stay on Simpson until you were married? Barbara. Yes. And then where did you and Pete live? We actually lived on Simpson in the original house that my parents had bought. Eventually, they built a big house. The lot was long, and the little house sat in the back of the lot. So, eventually, they built a bigger house in the front, and we lived in the back of their house for about a year. Then, we moved out to Valley Vista, and we have been there since. We raised all our kids there and went to mill school. Pete went to mill school because he was born and raised in the Cañada Larga. He went to school, and all my children went to mill school. Suzanne. We think of that as way out in the country back then. Did you feel like you were way out in the country? Pete. Yes, yes. Suzanne. You did. Pete. I always wanted to live in town, but see now, I'm glad we were raised there. It was a different world altogether. Suzanne. Did you have a big piece of property or a small farm? Pete. No, we worked for the Canet Ranch. Suzanne. Oh, you were out at Canet's. Pete. Yeah. My mother worked for the Canet Ranch. Suzanne. Any apricots? Pete. Oh, we had lots of apricots there, and walnuts. Suzanne. Did you work as a kid? Oh, yeah. That was from Pete. Barbara. They even migrated to other parts of the country. Suzanne. Oh, really? Barbara. State, rather. Suzanne. Just working in crops or specifically in walnuts and apricots? Pete. We had walnuts and apricots on the ranch, and beans, and hay. Suzanne. That couldn't have been a bad childhood. Pete. No, I loved it. Suzanne. And you had the creek running through, didn't you? Pete. Oh, yes, it was at the bottom. Suzanne. And the railroad was... Oh, no, that was down below. Suzanne. Down below? We were in the canyon, the cañada. Suzanne. Oh, yes, you were all the way up in the canyon. Pete. Yes, but our swimming hole was down there at the bottom there, a big rock and a swimming pool. Suzanne. Yeah. Moses. Well, Pete, being that we know where you lived, where you went to school, where you worked, why don't you tell us about your military experience? Pete. Well, I joined the Navy in 1950. I was 4 years on a destroyer, and I went to Korea. 3 cruises up there. Moses. That's what I was thinking as you were talking, that it would have been Korea. Pete. After the 4 years, I got out. Moses. After mill school, what happened? Did you end up at Ventura High also? Pete. Yes. I went to Ventura Junior High, and then I went to Ventura High School. Moses. Is there an age difference between the two of you? Pete. Yes. 4.5 years. Moses. So you didn't know him? Barbara. No. Pete. I knew her when she was small. Moses. You remember, huh? Pete. Yes, I remember. Suzanne. Just waiting? Pete. No, I didn't even know how to wait. Barbara. He remembers the store, basically. Pete. It just happened that my cousin was going with her sister, with Rosie. From Suzanne. Pete. He put me in, and he got out. Moses. Tell us about the kids, about your kids. Barbara. My kids. My oldest is Stephanie. She has 2 children. She is now a grandmother. She has 4 grandchildren. My son Pete, he has 2 children. My granddaughter played softball. She was quite a softball player. She went to UCSB on a scholarship. My 3rd daughter is Anna. You met her at the restaurant a couple weeks ago. Moses. Right. Barbara. She lives in Paso Robles. She is single. My youngest is married to Maggie Barone's son, and they have 2 children. Suzanne. Did Rosie marry? Barbara. Yes. Rosie married. He may have been in your class. Robert Gomez? I think he was in your class. Suzanne. Or a year after. I'm not sure. Barbara. Okay. Suzanne. A year older or younger. I'm not sure. Barbara. They have 1 adopted child, but he died in the service. Then my sister Rosie had a stroke, and she was bedridden for several years before she died. Suzanne. She was one of the prettiest girls in school. She was a beautiful gal. Barbara. Right. Bright, Bright, very smart. Moses. How old was she when she died? Barbara. She just died recently, but she had a stroke when she was about 45, so she kind of gradually declined health-wise from that point. Eventually, she was bedridden, and in the last days, then she died about a year ago. Moses. So your dad, Benny, after he closed down the stores, he took another job as a watchman. And what about your mother? Barbara. My mother worked at the packing house. What was the name of that packing house? Pete. Pacific. Barbara. Pacific Lemon out at Montalvo. Pete. Pacific Lemon at Montalvo. Moses. Out at Montalvo? It's still there. Pete. Still there. Barbara. My mother worked there for quite a while. Moses. They're not with us. Barbara. Right. They're both gone. Moses. And when did they pass? Barbara. My father, I think it was in 1988, and my mother in 2000. Suzanne. I want to ask, what did your parents do for fun? But I'm not sure they had time for fun. Did they ever go to the green mill or parties? Barbara. They liked to go camping, and sometimes they would take us camping. Pete. They used to go to parties a lot. Barbara. They would get together with their friends. Suzanne. You have to remember in the 50s, lives were much quieter. Parties meant several families got together, or you had a barbecue, or you had some people over for dinner. My parents did the same thing. They didn't go out. Barbara. Not really. Those people didn't have a lot of money then either. Suzanne. No. Pete. Can I say something about Benny? Moses. Sure. Pete. Remember the B&B restaurant right across from the Avenue Bowl? Moses. Yeah. Pete. Benny used to own that too. Behind that used to be a trailer park, and that was part of the income he had. When Farad bought the trailer park, that's how he built the houses on Simpson. Moses. Okay. Pete. But he had that trailer park. Barbara. But my dad owned that site where Ramirez and Farad had the business. Suzanne. So he was a careful, hard-working man. Pete. Yes. Barbara. Yes. So you're saying then that the trailer park was part of a complex that eventually became Las Palmas? Pete. Yes. The parking lot and all of that. Moses. Okay. That's gone because 1 block north of there, there's still a trailer park there. Pete. His was right across the building. Moses. He had the trailer park, but not the B&B restaurant. Pete. Oh, no, that was his too. Moses. It was? Pete. Yeah, all that whole complex was. Barbara. He didn't operate it. He just owned the property. Moses. Own the property. Okay. B&B. Barbara. Yes, remember the B&B? You were too young then. Moses. I don't know that I remember the B&B. Suzanne. You were just a kid. Moses. I'll admit to that. Pete. They used to have really good food there. Moses. I came in at the very tail end of this. Barbara. You remember it, though, don't you, Suzanne? The B&B? Suzanne. I think so. We'll take a vote out there, and they'll remember it. Moses. That is so great that so many years into this process, we are still finding a few little new things, like the arcade that came up, the penny arcade that came up at our meeting today. Yeah, now we have information that is valuable to the rest of the city. Suzanne. I wasn't at the meeting. Tell me about the penny arcade. Moses. Oh, the new museum has a new program out, and they had this picture of the penny arcade, and they were asking the residents of Ventura, does anyone know where this was located? Right there, at our meeting, that question was answered. Bob Mina said, oh yeah, it was right next door to Heine's Pool Hall. Barbara. Do you remember that? Suzanne. Perfect place. Pete. Yeah. Susan. Why would you not? Barbara. Pete remembers. Moses. Yeah. So one of us is going to be the first to walk into the museum and say, yeah, we know where it's at, exactly where it's at. Because, you know, today, where Heine's Pool Hall was, doesn't really have an address. It's part of the bigger thrift store there, right? Pete. Yes. But in the old days, it had its own address. So this one probably was between the Mission, but there is a good picture available to us. Suzanne. Great. Moses. Sitting in this room right now. That is why this process is so valuable. Pete, do you remember the green mill used to be a bowling alley? Moses, I don't remember it, but we knew that. Pete, I used to set pins there. Moses, you did as a job? Pete, yes. I was going to school and I worked there as a pin setter. Suzanne, you had one interview where some fellows, several, I don't know, Barney may have been in on that conversation, but they were sharing experiences working at the bowling alley with no protective devices. You just jumped and got out of the way. Pete, oh yeah. Suzanne, did you ever get hit? Pete, no, but pretty close though. People would get their own ball and throw it down there, and we're setting pins and they would throw the ball out there. I remember they would get through bowling, they would just slip 50 cents or a quarter out as our tip. Moses, oh really? Suzanne, was that all you got or did you get paid? Pete, oh, we got paid. Suzanne, and then you got a tip for so much, especially if they hit you. Pete, yeah. If you didn't do a good job, they didn't tip you. Moses, we asked if your parents ever went to the Green Mill Ballroom. Did you all ever go to the Green Mill Ballroom? Barbara, oh yes. Suzanne, okay now, the secret's out. We are picturing timid Barbara, who just worked in the store, went home and did her homework. So when did you start going? When did you date, then go dancing, or was this after you were married? Barbara, we didn't go there together, did we? Pete, not when we were going to high school, no. It was 1955 or 1956 when we started going. Barbara, did we go to the Green Mill? Pete, yes, we used to go to the Green Mill. Moses, do you remember who you saw there? Okay. Tony Flores played there. Local bands played there. Barbara, that's right. Tony played there. Moses, when people like Perez Prado, who did Cherry Pink and Apple Blossom White, were those popular? Was the place packed? Pete, oh, all the time. All the time. Barbara, oh yeah, that was a popular place to go. Moses, all the time, no matter who was there? Les Brown? Pete, it's because that was really all we ever had. Moses, it was always packed. Pete, Ralph Romero and Grigo used to own that. Moses, yeah, Grigo and Ralph Romero. Suzanne, Barbara, how old were you when you first went dancing at the Green Mill? Barbara, to the Green Mill? Suzanne, did they have an age limit? Barbara, I don't think so. I don't remember any kids running around. Yeah. Barbara, teenagers maybe. Suzanne, teenagers, it was okay. Were they serving drinks there? Pete, yeah. Suzanne, but nobody checked? Pete, nobody really checked because they had the bar separate. Suzanne, yeah. Pete, unless they saw kids out there buying, then yeah. Suzanne, so that was a place to go for a date then? Pete, when they had a good dance, yes, and they had dances all the time there. Barbara, that was a fun place to go. Everybody went. Moses, and there was another one down on where the bowling alley, Pete, Poinsettia Bowl. Moses, Poinsettia Bowl. Moses, that was also a dance hall. Barbara, it was on the avenue here? Moses, no, not the Avenue Bowl. Poinsettia Bowl, over on Thompson Boulevard. Barbara, oh, okay. Pete, across from the Arto Lube. Barbara, yeah. That was a dance hall? Pete, yes. Barbara, I don't remember that. Moses, and then the bathhouse. Suzanne, it was the Buena Theater when we were like seniors in high school. They made this big modern movie theater. Oh, it had everything. It had a cry room. It had a soda fountain. Moses, a cry room? Suzanne, yes. So you could go and bring your baby if the baby cried. And you went and you sat in luxury in the cry room. It was the best. And it didn't last any time at all because the movies were over. It was the middle 50s. Moses, television was coming in. Suzanne, television was coming in like gangbusters. And this big movie theater, clear out. Well, it wasn't far enough to be the East End, to be like at 5 Points, where people gathered at Merle's and so forth, and it wasn't far enough downtown. It was just sitting there, and where that bowling alley is now, and it just died. It was a beautiful theater. Moses. I never heard of a cry room. I thought if the movie was sad that you were crying, you could go in there. MB. They have those things in churches. Suzanne. Where else did you go to have fun? Barbara. Besides the movies and the Green Mill? Suzanne. Yes. Barbara. Oh, my dad used to take us to see the wrestlers out in El Rio. Suzanne. Oh, really? Barbara. Yeah, that was fun. Suzanne. That was a family afternoon. Was it at night? Barbara. There was Gorgeous George and all those wrestlers. Pete. I didn't go. Barbara. You didn't go to the wrestling? Yeah, my dad used to take us out there to El Rio. It was a little ways out there. Suzanne. He would take all his girls? Barbara. Yeah. Suzanne. Did your mom go? Barbara. No, she didn't, but we enjoyed that. They would have tag team wrestling, and these guys that were unpopular, well, then everybody booed. Then the good guys, the Garibaldi. Suzanne. Well, we knew it from television as well. Barbara. Yeah. Was it at night or on a Sunday afternoon? Barbara. I don't remember. It must have been at night. Moses. When you were young and coming up, you as a teenager, as a young adult, if you were to go see a movie, where did you usually go? Barbara. We went to the Mission Theater, and we went to the American Theater, and I think the Mayfair was in operation at the time. We used to pay 10 cents to go to the movies. Moses. How about the drive-in? When did the drive-in come in? Barbara. Oh, the drive-in was always there. Moses. Oh, a long time. Yeah, this is from Suzanne. I don't know when it died. I don't remember when it folded. Moses. It was sometime after 1965. Suzanne. Yeah, that sounds about right. Moses. I'm not exactly sure when, though. Suzanne. That was a big ticket. They always had a big crowd at the drive-in. Moses. Actually, I think the drive-in lived into the early 80s because I remember taking my daughter to the drive-in. I wasn't big on the drive-in myself, but when you have a toddler with you, Suzanne, there's not much else you can do. The cry room was gone. Moses, yeah, and I think it lived into the early 80s before it became the swap meet. So your father took you guys camping? Was that around here? Barbara, no, he would take us way out there. What was the name of that place? Potrero Seco? Peter, he would take them out to Cuyama. Moses, oh, all the way up the Highway 33. Barbara, yeah, way out there. Suzanne, what were you driving when you went up there? Barbara, well, we had an old truck. We would haul mattresses, pots and pans, all the stuff in the back of the truck, and just camp out in the night. Suzanne, fish? Barbara, no, he liked to hunt. In fact, Pete used to take him hunting at the Cañada Larga before we got married. Suzanne, was there good hunting at the Cañada Larga? Pete, oh, yes. Nobody could get in except us. Moses, so when you say you went camping, you mentioned you took your own mattresses up there? Barbara, yeah. Moses, you don't mean sleeping bags. You mean mattresses. Barbara, yeah, we didn't have sleeping bags. Moses, so no tent, just out under the stars. Barbara, yep, just out in the open. Just throw the mattress wherever and gaze at the stars. Pete, that was roughing it, huh? Barbara, well, if that's what you call roughing it. Suzanne, it doesn't seem like roughing it at the time. Barbara, no, it was fun. Suzanne, farmers all built camp wagons where they would just take an old flat wagon with low sides and they'd run a tarp over the top and then they'd have a camp wagon. And they would just go. We're just too soft anymore. Barbara, well, we have a motorhome now, so that's the way we go camping now. Suzanne, there you go. Barbara, a far cry from those days. Moses, it's just my observation. It could be way off from everyone else, but camping wasn't something that I know in our household. I mean, we never went camping. Some of the boys, I guess if they went camping, it was like through the police boys, R&P aisles. They took boys out like that. The first time I went camping was in the military. It was actually in Vietnam. And it hasn't come up a lot either in our interview process that people say they went camping. That intrigued me. Barbara. Oh, yeah. Well, tell them how you used to go camping when you had to go pick plums. Pete. Well, a couple of years we went to go pick plums. We used to have a tarp, and in those days, from avocados and apricots for windbreakers and everything, and that's what we used to do for a month or so. I didn't like it. And then when we first got married, she said, let's go camping. And I said, I've been camping all my life. I don't want to go camping. Barbara, that wasn't fun. Suzanne, no. Prunes, that means clear up in Stockton, doesn't it? Pete, no. Prunes up in San Jose. See, my father had a steady job, so we only did this twice. Moses, being that both of you and all of us grew up here, we had the Ventura River on one side of us, and then we had the ocean. Was there any particular relationship that either of you had, either playing or fishing at the ocean or the river? Barbara, my dad took us grunion hunting. Suzanne, did you get some? Barbara, yeah, we used to go grunion hunting. We would light a fire. Moses, back in the days we could. Barbara, we used to like to do that. Moses, how about you, Pete? Any relationship to the river or the ocean? Did you go fishing? Pete, oh, we used to fish out at the Ventura River all the time. That's all we had. Moses, yeah. Barbara, he would go swimming. Pete, that's right. The big rock and the coves. Barbara, they had a swimming hole up there where they would swim. Pete, we were all up there at the river. Suzanne, did you catch steelhead? Pete, yes, big steelhead. They were easy to catch. Suzanne, did you spearfish or linefish? Pete, no, we just caught them with our hands or bamboo or whatever, something to knock them out of the river there. Suzanne, how big did they run? Oh, they were that big. Showing the approximate size with his hands. They were pretty big. Suzanne, once you had them, they were pretty strong, weren't they? Pete, yes, they were. Suzanne, did you throw them on the bank? Pete, yes. I'm trying to think of the transcriber saying, oh, they were that big? So we're talking about, 18 to 24 inches? That's some good-sized steelhead. Suzanne, one of my favorite stories that I got off the newspaper when they changed the limit on steelhead for a day's fishing, they dropped it. This was 1905 or 6. They dropped the limit from 50 to 25 steelhead a day. Well, you couldn't carry 25 steelhead. Barbara, oh gosh, I can't even imagine that many fish. Suzanne, I can't imagine, but they had cut it down to 25 in that time, so they must have been able to walk across a river on steelhead. Pete, we had a lot of them growing up. Suzanne, yeah, not anymore. Pete, no, not anymore. Moses, so you still like to fish? Pete, yes, I love it. Barbara, yes, we love fishing. Pete says, I wasn't really a fish eater until I married her, and then I turned around. She likes fish, Suzanne, your dad didn't fish, though. Where did you buy fish? Barbara, I don't know where we got the fish. Suzanne, I don't remember any stories of a fish market. Barbara, no, I don't remember any fish market in Ventura. Suzanne, Slim Bayless had a big meat market. Did Benny sell or have a big meat case? Barbara, yeah. Suzanne, he butchered? Barbara, yes, he did. Moses, he butchered and produced his own meat? Barbara, yes. He would cut chops, roasts, or whatever. Suzanne, we take all these things for granted, where everybody is specialized, where there's a butcher and there's a produce man and so forth, but Benny did it all. Barbara, yes, he did. I remember people would come and order 4 slices of bologna. So we had big rolls of bologna and salami and put it on the slicer. We would slice as many as they wanted. Suzanne, did you do businesses of turkeys at Thanksgiving or Christmas? Barbara, I don't remember that. Suzanne, that might be more recent. Barbara, I think so, because I don't remember having turkey. Moses, did you ever buy a mattress from the Bell Mattress Factory? Barbara, yeah, oh yeah. Pete, we still have one. Moses, you still have one. Okay, we have to angle that into our program some way. Where do we go from here? Is there another story that you can tell us? Pete, I can tell you that Benny was a nice man. He was a great man. Moses, yeah, we've gotten that over and over. I don't know how many times Barbara has been thanked by various families. Your dad sustained us. You know that. Barbara, yeah, he helped out a lot. Suzanne, was he a church-going man? Barbara, no, not really. Did he belong to any other fraternal organizations? Barbara, not that I know of. Suzanne, was that something that you saw in the Anglo neighborhood? You know, that they belong to this or that or the other? Moses, my parents belonged to a lodge. Suzanne, did they? The initials were UPBMI. Suzanne, what was that? Barbara, yeah, La Logia, wasn't it? Pete, La Logia. My mother belonged to that. Moses, as I remember, Paul Lozano was the president. Barbara, yes, I remember that. Moses, and they paid dues. For instance, when my father passed in 1969, we were at my mother's house. Within days, a check came to help with the funeral. The guys would come out and mow the lawns and just try to help the family get through this. You know, with all those kinds of lodges, I think they're still in existence, but when the younger generation don't join and they're not paying dues, then they have to start upping your monthly dues or they just go out of existence. Suzanne, I think the Masons are still going okay, holding it together, but the Oddfellows is just a little group of men who come and sit around at what is essentially a living room and watch a great big TV set, and then they go home. We've been exploring these different men's clubs. Of course, the Elks Lodge, they sold that several years ago, and they meet in a smaller place, so one by one, it's just the old guys. Moses. The other thing for Mexican families, I think, or the West Side Mexican families, was also the Knights of Columbus. Barbara, yeah. Moses. And the church organizations, the Guadalupana Society, working for the church, was also another place where they had something similar. As we know, the Knights of Columbus is still up and running. Suzanne, well, that's a good thing to take a note of because I never thought of that before. And that's another resource you could go to if you needed help. Moses, yeah, I recently found a pin, one of the badges they wear from the UPBMI. I tried to look them up, and I went on the internet, but they aren't on the internet. I actually got a phone number, but it wasn't a local phone number. It was maybe San Bernardino, but I never got a response when I tried to call. I was trying to research the UPBMI. Mr. Lozano is still alive, I believe. Mary Diaz in the audience. I think Natalia Perez. I think you can get it from her. Moses. Perez? Pete. Also, Quiros is still alive. He might give you some information. Moses. Who's that? Pete. Alfonso Quiros. He used to be the president as well. Barbara. We can give you his number. Good. Thank you. This is from Moses. It's part of the history of our town and what the people did. That's all the stuff we're trying to document. Pete. Barbara can give you the number. Call her. Moses. Okay. Pete. He was the ex-president. Moses. I do remember going as a kid to the meetings. As I remember, they were generally on Sunday afternoons. They were upstairs right here between Palm and Oak Street. There's a lodge upstairs. I think it's still there. At one point, 10 or 20 years ago, it was called the Mickey Moose Club. It was a nightclub. They took the name from the Moose Lodge, I guess it was. Suzanne, yeah, it was the Moose Lodge. Moses, they probably just rented it or borrowed it because I think their meetings were probably once a month or something. As I remember, the business was conducted in Spanish. Pete, yes. De la Logia, yes. They used to meet at the fairgrounds, too, in one of the Quonsets. Suzanne, there's a lot of things that don't usually come up in these interviews, but they point out, like, this sudden thinking about it for the first time, the difference between the East End and the West End, and the mix in the middle. Downtown, everybody mixes, but the East End did certain things, and the West End did certain things, and that's an interesting example. Moses. One of the things that we didn't talk about yet, either of you, did you ever go to see the ball games here with the minor leagues playing the baseball games? Pete, when Babe Ruth was here? Moses, yeah, when Babe Ruth was here, did you enjoy? Did you go regularly or as much as you could? Pete, yeah. Barbara, well, The ball players used to have to walk by my dad's store when he was across from Seaside Park. The ball players would just stop in there and buy stuff. Suzanne, oh, I bet you and Rosie hated that. Barbara, oh, we got to know some of the ball players. Pete, I used to get cold there. Suzanne, oh, wet and drip off the end of your nose and foggy. Moses, yeah, I guess it wasn't really the best location for baseball. They found that out when they would hit fly balls at night and it was lost in the fog. Suzanne, yeah. Moses, but it did go on for quite a while. Barbara, well, it was the Oilers and then it was the Yankees. Suzanne, it was the Yankees for a while. Once you built the thing, then you have to justify it by going on and having ball games. Moses, I think once upon a time it was the Braves too. Pete, yes, the ones from Santa Barbara. Moses, we had that, MB and I, the decision to make when we were doing the mural the first time. We wanted to portray a baseball culture in town, Babe Ruth and Babe Ruth Field. Our choices were like a uniform of a Yankee, but we didn't really feel like a Yankee or Braves, not that we didn't feel brave, but because it was a whole mascot thing. But Oilers, Oilers, this town grew up around the oil fields, and there's no getting around it. So the Oilers were the local ones to be portrayed in the mural. That's the way it is from the beginning as to now. Suzanne, we had a long history with baseball. Oh, Ventura was a big baseball team in the early years. After the parade, the 4th of July or whatever, the whole town would walk down to the field to watch the local boys play. I think the Bank of America, the bank had a team, the fire department would have a team, and then they would all have terrific competition amongst them. Moses, right, so they were operating at different levels. Some of those teams were actual minor league teams. Barbara, yeah. Yeah, in the early days, Moses, single A, double A, triple A baseball. Suzanne, we had a few. I can't remember his name, but we had Charlie, I forget, about 1913. He went on and became a pro ball player, and everyone in town was terribly proud of him for his accomplishments. That was a very big deal. Barbara, well, Lynn Noren. Suzanne, that's right, he was. Barbara, did he go professional or semi-professional? Do you remember the name? Suzanne, I think so, yeah. Moses, yes, from Noren Market, over there by the college. Barbara, he was a ball player. Moses, any time one of your athletes gets recognized or even makes it to the minor leagues professional play, you have to be good. You have to be good to have the uniform on. Pete, yes, yes. Moses, okay, you went dancing at the Green Mill Ballroom, you went camping, and you went to movies at the Mission Theater and the American Theater. Suzanne, and grunion hunting. That was a good date night. Moses, how much time did you spend at Heine's Pool Hall? Well, Pete is nodding his head. Suzanne, she's shaking her head, so is he. Barbara, did you go to Heine's? Pete, yes, I played pool there. Most of the women would go in there because they would say, go get your dad. Go tell your dad that dinner's ready. And the girls would go. Pete, yes, yes. Moses, okay, you went dancing at the Greenwell Ballroom. You went camping. And you went to the movies at the Mission Theater and the American Theater. Suzanne, and grunion hunting. That was a good date night. Moses, how much time did you spend at Heine's Pool Hall? Well, Pete is nodding his head. Suzanne, she's shaking her head and so is he. Barbara, did you go to Heine's? Pete, yes. I played pool there. Moses, most of the women that would go in there, and that was because they would say, go get your dad. Go tell your dad that dinner's ready. And the girls would go, and I remember my dad taking me in there. It was nothing for a little kid to be in the bar and sitting there and my dad would take me in there, and a little kid would just be sitting there and eating. She's shaking her head, and so is he. Barbara, did you go to Heine's? Pete, yes, I played pool there. Moses, Most of the women that would go there, they would say to them, go get your dad. Go tell him that dinner is ready. And then the girls would go. I remember my dad taking me in there. It was nothing for a kid to be in the bar and sitting it there and just letting us eat the pig's feet. Suzanne, lick the foam off the beer. That's not a personal experience. I remember it from an oral history. Moses, the Penny Arcade that came out today and that we were able to say it was next to Heine's, did you go there? Pete, I only went one time. I stayed mostly up on top. Moses, I guess it took its name literally. If you had some pennies, you could go in there and play little slots or games. Suzanne, slot machines have a long history. The brothels used to have slot machines. The mothers would come and say their sons had been playing the slot machines and they wanted to shut the place down. Moses, wow. I'm surprised that the county museum has to put that question out to the public. Does anyone know where this is? Because they have all the old telephone books from the 1940s and 50s. I know this because part of the research for Tortilla Flats was going down there and checking out, for instance, the 1949 telephone book. Not only was everything in there, but sometimes they would break it down by the street. You could go from Front Street or Brook Street all the way down. I did this with a pen and paper. I wrote it down because you couldn't copy it or anything, and so that we would know in 1949 or 1954, whatever year you chose, that this is where so-and-so lived, and this was their neighbor, and there was no doubt about it. You could do the same thing on Main Street. You could go right down Main Street and see what building, what businesses was in that building at any particular time. So what I'm saying is they have that answer there, right there, in their own telephone books. Suzanne, they may have figured that a penny arcade didn't need a telephone. Moses, maybe, but Heine's had a number next door. Anyway, I'm sure that they would be glad to know. Suzanne, how big was the penny arcade? How wide was the building? Moses, it was wide. Suzanne, Heine's was big enough for a number of pool tables, but the penny arcade was a big building? Pete, yeah, it was wide. Suzanne, really? Moses, Punky brought the brochure. It's here. You can look at the picture. It looked quite big. Pete, that's the only one we had. Moses, well, okay, so if there's no more stories and you don't want to confess anything else? Barbara, I can't think of anything else. Suzanne, you don't want to tell anything on your sisters? Because they're not here. Moses, oh, your sister Pat, the youngest one. She lives on Simpson, doesn't she? Barbara, yes, she lives there. Moses, in the same house? Barbara, well, it's the newer house. Moses, it's the newer house. Barbara, my parents bought the original little wood structure, just a real tiny house when they first came to Ventura, but it's the same area, the same lot. She inherited the house, my sister Pat did, and she's still there. Moses, yeah, that kind of came to me while you were telling your story about where everybody was at. Well, good. This just might be a wrap then, and I want to thank you both. And this is wonderful new information for us, and it just keeps coming. So thank you so much. All right? Barbara, thank you for doing it.